quite noisy. This is an interview with Hugh Knowles, Professor Emeritus from the University of Alberta. The date is May 20th, 1994, and we're in the office of Lombard North Group in Calgary. Good morning, Hugh.
Hi, Linda.
Thanks very much for agreeing to take time to talk with me today about your life in landscape architecture, or your connection with landscape architecture through your life. I wonder if we could begin with just a few kind of background questions, please. Where were you born and when?
I come from Fort William, Ontario, which is now Thunder Bay.
And when were you born?
Born in 1920.
And the actual date?
February the 15th, day after Valentine's Day.
That's right. But you're still a sweetheart, right?
Yeah.
That's good. And then you went, did you do your schooling in Fort William?
My high school, public and high school, was all in Thunder Bay. Yeah, Fort William. Yeah.
Okay. And then you went on to do a degree in agriculture at the University of Toronto.
Yes.
What made you choose that? What was the impetus for it?
Well, actually, the University of Toronto School or Faculty of Agriculture was at Guelph. And Guelph, of course, in Ontario was the place for anyone who wanted to study agriculture or veterinary medicine. And that was the reason. My mother, too, both my parents, I think, were sort of amateur botanists. And my mother had attended a short course at Guelph. She was very much impressed with Guelph. She was very much impressed with the people that came out of Guelph that she knew in Thunder Bay. So she said, that's we're a pretty good place to go. So that's how I ended up there.
Was that the Ontario Agricultural College?
That was the Ontario Agricultural College, yeah.
Okay. But the degree was actually from
the
University
of Toronto, yes.
Yeah, until they changed that over.
Yeah.
So that was from about 1941 to 44?
1939 to 1944, yeah.
So you were doing that while other people were on the other side of the Atlantic.
That's right. I had some bum ears, and this was the reason I couldn't get into the services. And so... I'm sure you did a good job of your time.
And then you went, right after that, you did a teaching certificate?
I did a teaching certificate at the Ontario College of Education, which is education faculty for the University of Toronto.
And where was that? Was that in Toronto?
That was in Toronto, yes.
And then did you teach right
after that? I went to a little village, I suppose, or hamlet called Burford, which is just outside of Brantford. And I taught high school there for 2.5 years.
And then something happened.
I was sending my wife home for the summer, and I was looking for a job to support us during the summer. And I heard that Stanley Thompson, the golf course architect, the renowned golf course architect, was building a course up at Thunder Bay, or Fort William. So I thought, well, I'll hop on the train and go over to Guelph and catch Stanley Thompson at his place of business, which is Cutting Fields. And I had a great time with Stanley. He was very receptive to my request for a job for the summer. And as a matter of fact, he said, Hugh, he said, you're crazy teaching school. He said, you should get into horticulture. He said, if I could find you a job, would you be interested? And yeah. So one of the things he was going to get me involved in was the hotels, the Empress Hotel out in Victoria. Yes. He said, the old gardener there is just about to retire. He's been there for donkey's years. I guess he was an old Scotsman. He said, I think you might like it. And he said, we'll have an interview with the manager of the CPR hotels and see if we can get you the job. So I was a callow youth at the time, and we went down to the Royal York and met this man. He looked at me and said, no, this kid could never replace this 80-year-old gardener or whatever it was. So I didn't get the job. And Stanley said, don't worry, he says, something will come up by the end of the summer. So I spent the summer working for Stanley, and I didn't get working on this golf course up at Fort William, but I got working on a housing project up at Geraldton, which is 200 miles north of Fort William. And along about September, just when I was going to have to go back and teach high school, I guess it was late August probably, I got a phone call saying, where in hell are you? This was from Stanley's outfit. I don't know why. I don't know why they'd sort of forgotten about me way up in northern Ontario. And the voice said, Stanley's been looking all over hell for you. He has a job for you. And this was the job at the University of Alberta. Stanley was doing campus planning out there, where Stanley's firm was. And wondered if I would be interested in a job carrying on that aspect and teaching in the Department of Plant Science. So I thought this was great, and I resigned. I resigned from teaching at Burford in December, I guess, end of the first term, and we found our way to Edmonton about the 1st of January 1948, and stayed there.
Isn't that wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that nice that someone like Stanley took an interest in you and in your career to that extent?
Mm-hmm. I thought it was tremendous.
Yeah, because after the one didn't work out in Victoria, he could have easily said, well, I've done my thing and that's that's enough. But nice that he persevered and had your best interests at heart.
It was.
Yeah. So at the University of Alberta, you taught in horticulture, or you taught in the plant science department?
Horticulture was a division of the plant science department. So I taught horticulture, and I was very fortunate, I think, in having the head of the horticulture division was Bob Hilton, who was well known to landscape architects and to horticulturists across Canada. Bob was just a wonderful person, and great inspiration. Very nice. He wasn't just a horticulturist. He was very, very broad, and this really appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. And so you were teaching what kinds of courses there?
Well, I taught landscape horticulture. Landscape horticulture and plant materials for the most part during the first part of my time there. Latterly, I expanded into other phases of horticulture as well. While I was there, I started on a master's degree, and eventually got a master's degree in plant physiology. And my interests there were plant hardiness, germination phenomena, and this sort of thing, and I really enjoyed it.
Now, while you were teaching and while you were working on a master's degree, you were also connected with the campus planning operation of the
Yes.
university. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. In addition to campus planning, I also ran the grounds department. We had a foreman and probably 20 or 30 people in that end of things, and then I got into the campus planning aspect, which also took a lot of time. I was just at that time running about 3 sections at once. There's the grounds department, the teaching, and the campus planning. And eventually, by 1968, I was around, perhaps about 1965. I got rid of the grounds department and was campus planning and teaching totally. And then about 1968, I dropped the campus planning and was teaching full time. In the campus planning section, I had a drafting room and a couple of people working for me, and we would produce plans for campus development.
In conjunction with other departments on campus, or you were the focus and other departments came to you?
In those days, most of our engineering, that is roads, sidewalks, and parking lots, etc., and so on. We would I would do the planning, and then we would send this information over to the Provincial Department of Public Works, and their engineers would write the specifications and so on for the roads, sidewalks, etc. And Public Works at that time too did all the campus buildings, and I would have input there in siting to some degree, and certainly site development.
What was the background that you had to be able to do this work? Was it because you didn't? Was that things that you learned at the Ontario Agricultural College? Was there site planning as part of that?
Yes.
That study?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
However, it was certainly more strongly involved in horticulture rather than, there was a little, but not a great deal. No, I had to acquire most of this through experience. I was fortunate in that I was able to get away and take a degree in landscape architecture, but that came somewhat later. Came in the early 60s, I guess.
So up till that time, until you did the degree, you were basically using what as a model for your planning decisions? Kind of things that you knew? A natural talent.
I don't know. I had a great interest in it, and
were you corresponding with other campus planners across the country? Did you get
no? But I had a strong connection to the engineering people on campus, and I'm sure by osmosis I must have acquired quite a bit from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was. Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess that's about all.
So then, as a result of being thrown into the fray and being forced to swim, at some point you decided to do a degree in landscape architecture. Could you tell me about that?
Okay, that went way back to my days as an undergraduate at Guelph. About the time I was graduating, there was a lot of work going on in the Seaway, and and I just said to myself, or said to my friends at Guelph, that I'm going to become a landscape architect. I'm going to work in the Seaway project, because there's a lot of work going to be done down there. And at that time, there was no opportunity to take landscape architecture in Canada. I'd have to go across the line, and I suppose if I'd had a lot of money, I probably would have gone across the line and taken landscape architecture right after Guelph, probably, rather than go into teaching. But I didn't, and the opportunity to go and take landscape architecture came sometime later.
Sorry, just to go back a little bit, what was the connection between the Seaway and landscape architecture in your mind? Why was that
I knew that when the Seaways, there's going to be a lot of development along with the Seaway, and I felt that this is where landscape architecture would be. Landscape architects would be playing a big part. I don't know. It just seemed to be a natural.
When was the Seaway? When was that development? What are we talking
about?
Well,
we were talking. I think politicians were talking about the Seaway in the 40s, and so I don't know why I fixed totally on the Seaway, but that's what I was going to do.
So that was there, as you say, that seed had been planted some 20 years earlier. Then while you were at the University of Alberta, the opportunity did then present itself to do a degree. How did that come about?
On my first sabbatical, I decided I was going to go down to Michigan State. The university at that time said, "Look, we can't give you a full sabbatical at this time. I don't know whether it's because too many people were applying or just what it was. But we'll give you 3 months off, full pay, and off you go to Michigan State." So I did. And while I was there, I registered in the Faculty of Landscape Architecture, School of Landscape Architecture, I suppose. And I registered for courses. I was taking them for credit, and I'm glad I did this, because 3 years later, I got a full sabbatical, and I went down, and I was able to. I got my sabbatical split at that time into 2 parts, because if I went down and just did a full year, there'd be a lot of courses that I couldn't get. So I got it split up, so that I went down for 3 quarters, and then I went down for a quarter to pick up the courses that I needed. And then I went down for a couple summer sessions and completed the degree. And that's how it worked out. It was good. And I think Michigan State was an excellent school. They had good, enthusiastic staff members, and I don't think I could have found a better place, really.
Who were some of the people that you studied with?
There was a prof by the name of Carl Gerlach. Clancy Lewis, Pete Frazier, a fellow by the name of Coffin, I just forget his first name. A number of people who were there as students in my time. There was Dick Forster, who he's ended up in Italy, but prior to going to Italy, he was on the staff at the University of Guelph. Let's see. Dick Toth, who's now at the University of Utah State. Craig Johnson, another classmate, he's also at Utah State.
Hard to recall a lot of names, isn't it? What was sort of the basic philosophical design concept of the university? What was it that they taught you about landscape art?
Well, the fact that landscape practice involves, first of all, sitting down and doing some what is tantamount to basic planning before the design aspect begins. Certainly being thorough in your approach to any problem, any landscape problem. I think probably they stressed the behavioral science aspects pretty strongly. How do people react? How are people going to react to this particular thing? Is it going to be functional? You know? Just really good basics, I think.
Mm-hmm. Was there a particular regional bias to the dissemination of material at all?
No.
Because of where you were located?
No, there wasn't. In fact, we did projects that were centered in Bermuda. Mm. And no, there's no regional bias.
Because when I was talking with Roman Fawchuk, for instance, he had gone to Berkeley and was saying that a lot of the basis of their design philosophy was based on the California mission style in architecture, and of course the climate there, that whole desert sense of that region impacted their understanding certainly of landscape architecture. There was a very regional consciousness that was part of the education program.
Yeah.
And you don't feel that was
did not exist there.
Do you feel that because you were trained actually both in Canada and in the United States, although at the University of Guelph it wasn't a landscape architecture program at that time, do you feel there was any difference between those two educations that you received?
Oh, certainly. I think the technical aspects were certainly a lot stronger at Michigan State. The program at Guelph was certainly oriented to horticulture, to landscape horticulture. We had an excellent person there teaching landscape horticulture at the time, and she was a good design-oriented person, but you didn't get the sort of fundamental approach that you had to deal with people and their needs. She was great at how to put plants together to create compositions with plant materials, and you were designing space to some degree, but down at Michigan State, the emphasis was on the spatial aspect. The lady at Guelph was a Miss Haringa, who you may or may not have heard of. Just an excellent person. I think she was trained at Harvard, but as I say, because it was a course in landscape horticulture, the emphasis on landscape architecture didn't come through nearly as strongly, although it was there.
Mm-hmm. What about the cultural differences between Canada and the United States? Was there any, did you feel when you were in the States that there was any kind of cultural bias that was part of your education?
Not really, no.
This is all kind of leading me to the question of what is Canadian landscape architecture? What do you think that it is?
Well, I don't know. I think certainly landscape architecture, there are quite a number of sizable, good landscape projects in Canada. I think there's been a lot of good work done in national parks, a lot of good work done in regional and provincial parks. And I suppose this is where the profession of landscape architecture shines in Canada through these larger projects. Certainly, I'm sure there's a bit of residential work going on, but excuse me, I think the residential work takes certainly a second place to some of the larger things. In addition to parks, I think we're getting involved in urban things. There have been a number of projects involving sort of urban enclaves that landscape architecture or Canadian landscape architects have had something to do with.
Does an American education affect the performance of a landscape architect in Canada, do you think? Do you think there's any difference between your education at Michigan, say, and someone who is a more recent graduate from the program at Guelph or UBC or somewhere else?
No, I don't really think so. No.
That there's something universal about the concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
maybe, do you think landscape architecture is just a very Western concept, that it's something that naturally focuses out of the United States?
When you say Western concept, what do you mean?
Well, I guess Occidental as opposed to Oriental.
Give me that question again.
Okay. Do you think that landscape architecture is a Western-based concept, so that it can come out of the United States as a focus, as a crucible, I guess?
Well, certainly, landscape architecture has become certainly strongly associated with Occidental culture ever since the Italian Renaissance, I suppose, and prior to that, even in the early Middle Eastern gardens, which I suppose are still Occidental or Semitic or something like that. Now, certainly there's a landscape tradition in Oriental countries. Whether this tradition in the Oriental countries has grown up with a profession like landscape architecture, I doubt. I don't think that aspect plays very well. I think most of the tradition, the Oriental tradition, certainly started with some religious connotation, and certainly I think that the profession of landscape architecture has evolved from those early beginnings, although I dare say the old gardens in Japan are certainly have some religious connotation, and well, I think in the evolution there, where in the Occidental world, most of the gardens that we think of today, the old gardens that we think of today, grew up in the Italian Renaissance. I think there was a similar situation in the Oriental field, where the emperor and some of the shoguns and so on started to develop a landscape style that deviated to some degree from the religious overtones that had preceded it. Actually, I think the Japanese garden, which we all appreciate very much as a delightful art form, had its beginnings in China. It was brought over to Japan. When you go to Japan, I'm sure there's a very strong landscape architectural base there, but I don't think you're aware of the same innovation and design we see in the Occidental world there, because I still think that this, even though perhaps Japanese landscape tried to break out of the earlier mold at the time of the emperors and the shoguns, I still think that it's still there in the background, and I would suspect that any landscape architect practicing in Japan would be strongly influenced by the earth, much more strongly influenced by the early gardens and the philosophy of development than they would be by any strong influence by modern landscape architecture. Yes.
I wonder if that's part of that too, when you're saying that you get a stronger sense of, these are not your words, these are mine, of manipulation of nature in the West versus the East. I wonder if some of that isn't also a sense of the scale difference, because things are so much bigger here than they are there. Mm-hmm. I can remember being totally amazed at a little restaurant in Japan, near Kyoto. They dropped a platform into the river. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, how nice that this river is only 8 inches deep. Well, the whole river had been terraced underneath, so that every one of these restaurants could drop a platform that we could all go sit out and eat on. And there were 5 of them in a row down this river. And the whole riverbed had been reconstructed so that it was 8 inches deep, so that this platform could land on it, so we could sit there and eat. So when I saw that, I thought to myself, there's a tremendous amount of manipulation of nature here. Yeah. It's just that maybe the scale is different from what we see in Canada and the United States.
Yeah, that could well be.
Yeah. But I think your comment about the religious basis for the Oriental as opposed to the Occidental is an important point. I think that's a very significant point in the differences there. Mm-hmm. Yet somehow there still is a universality to it all, I guess. And that's what I'm trying to understand is, in terms of Canada, if someone hasn't been educated here specifically in design principles, does that affect the way they do work in Canada?
No, I don't think so.
What is it then that affects the way you worked, for instance, at the University of Alberta before you did Michigan and after? What would be the elements, natural or otherwise, that would affect your design decisions?
Well, I think probably before I went to Michigan State, I was influenced more strongly by visual aspects than I was by the functional side of things. And when I came back from Michigan State, I realized that function was pretty basic, and so this was the first thing you had to address. Then you could think of the visual things later, but if your scheme did not function properly, it was absolutely no good. Mm-hmm. And so that, without a doubt, was the difference between the fact that I'd had simply horticultural training prior to, or landscape horticultural training in Canada, and it was more, I would say, you probably classified as architectural, probably.
Am I hearing you say that it's a difference in approach to the problem? It's a different process of solving a problem, one to the other?
Well, as I said, the after Michigan State, I was first of all concerned with how things functioned and I would spend my time just addressing this aspect. And prior to going to Michigan State, I would say, hey, I like the way. This is what I'm going to do. I want to make this look good, and function would be there. I would address function, but it seemed to be much less important at that stage, simply because my lack of training, I think, and the fact that my training up to that time had been horticultural and appreciation of plants, knew what they looked like, knew how they might look together and separately, and so the visual aspect seemed to be much more important. I was ignoring the other due to lack of experience, lack of training.
Well, you then, once you had both of these backgrounds, you brought an awful lot of special things to the practice of landscape architecture, because many landscape architects do not have the background that you have in horticulture. So you had that background. Then you had the, I think you called it the technical abilities from Michigan, and bringing those two things together, then there was a definite flowering of your profession.
A definite plus.
Well,
really, yeah. I certainly think, I just have the feeling that in landscape architecture today, I would like to see landscape architecture to become a graduate degree. And I would like to see people come into landscape architecture from other areas, behavioral sciences, earth sciences, horticulture. If they had an undergraduate degree in any one of these, and then went into a graduate degree in landscape architecture, I think they would benefit greatly, and I think the profession would benefit greatly.
In what ways? How do you?
Well, if you come into, suppose you go into landscape architecture right out of high school, you're going to learn a lot of technical things. You're going to learn a lot of drawing. You're going to spend hours on the boards, and your background, your technical background, is certainly going to be improved and broadened, but I think there are other areas that are going to be shortchanged because there just isn't that amount of time. For instance, to go back to horticulture as an example, my horticultural background as an example, I'm sure that there's a lot of people coming out with absolutely no appreciation of plant materials, and they're pretty important, and certainly the cultural aspects, how the physiology, how do they grow, what's a hardy plant, I think a landscape architect should be able to field some of the answers to questions that the general public have about their field. What do you know about soils? You can go to a landscape architect who just graduated, who's taken landscape architecture right out of high school, and ask them, there will people, what do you know about soils? And we don't have enough an opportunity to explore that within the thing. We get a little bit of taxonomy, I suppose, but there are a lot of important things to learn from other areas. And behavioral sciences, we get quite a bit of that in landscape architecture, but I think there's still a lot more that a good landscape architect should have in his background.
You're referring to psychology and sociology, those kinds of things?
Yeah, right. How do people react to space? How they react to particular spaces? Are you going to meet their needs? We do a heck of a lot. We address a lot of behavioral things in landscape architecture.
Without a very adequate background.
That's right. And I think if we can develop, or if you had people coming into landscape architecture through a graduate degree, I think we would have a lot more landscape architects becoming senior persons on some of these large projects. Right now, I find that there are a lot of specialists from other areas sort of leading a project, whereas a particular project might be just a natural for the landscape architect, and yet some of the other practitioners are being the leaders. Yeah.
We just were talking a second ago about different kinds of undergraduate degrees and then having a graduate degree in landscape architecture. Is there some things you'd like to add to that?
I'm thinking of at least 3 people in Canada who have arrived at landscape architecture via that route. Vic Janasic, Roman Fodchuk, and Holobowicz. And I'm sure each one of them would tell you that they have benefited to some degree from this undergraduate background. Because I'm sure they're they have enough horticulture, they have enough earth science, they have enough behavioral stuff to make their landscape architecture just a heck of a lot more meaningful and a lot more better solutions to problems as a result of their backgrounds. There are. Don Barron's mother. And I think I have about eight names of people who I think have come to landscape architecture through different areas. One, there's a fellow who came to landscape architecture through recreation planning, and I think this has helped him in that respect too.
Who is that?
A fellow by the name of Jim Mackey. Let's see. I guess all the others, I'm reflecting a bias on all the others. They're all horticulturists.
Well, that's a very important background, though.
Yeah.
You know, as you've said earlier, that when you have the horticultural background, you're able to talk more intelligently, for one thing, about the plant material. And that's not such a bad thing, is it? It's
no, and not only plant material, but the soils aspects, physiology,
yes,
cultural aspects. And,
Did Edmonton present any unique problems to you?
Certainly it did. I probably didn't let you finish there.
I can tell it was important.
But one of the really fascinating things about coming out to Western Canada was the fact that here you had a hardiness problem that you didn't have in Southern Ontario. And what is this all about? There would be plants in Southern Ontario that wouldn't have a hope in hell of growing out here, simply because our growing season wasn't long enough. The plants that we would use very, very widely in the east just weren't getting enough time to mature their tissues before going into our hard winter. And as a consequence of this, they would either kill to the ground or the snow line or something like this. And this whole aspect of hardiness was really quite fascinating. One of the things that we tried to do was to counter the fact that we had fewer nice things that we could grow here, was to start bringing in things and testing them in our particular climate. And I think we made very good progress with some of the programs that we were carrying on at that time.
And was that some of the work that you did with the different research stations?
Well, collaborative work with other research stations, yes. One of the organizations that I joined when I got out here was the Western Canadian Society for Horticulture, and it was a professional group at that time, and the members were largely scientists who operated out of federal research stations, universities, federal research stations and universities. And we'd meet once a year, and we'd deal with the problems of Western Canada. Now, there were sections, of course, in different horticultural sections, but the sections in which I was interested were those that dealt with woody plants. And we had great discussions, a lot of productive work was done. Unfortunately, due to the times and the scarcity of support, that organization is pretty well dropped out of sight. But they did a lot of good work.
Yeah. But there was, I noticed in the introduction to your book, The Woody Ornamentals for the Prairies, that you mentioned the Borden Research Station and a few of the other research facilities. And it's good that there was that kind of collaborative effort, because as you're saying, with the difficulties that the Edmonton climate imposed, you need to have that research capability as backup to be able to work with that in order to develop plant material.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be very interesting.
It was. Not only were we sort of bringing collections of new materials in, but we were bumping heads with people who were in the plant breeding business, and there's quite a lot of plant breeding going on at Morden. There was plant breeding going on at Saskatoon, and it was just interesting to see just what was the things that were coming out of these programs.
Good. Something else I would like to ask you about is, are other landscape architects or horticulturalists or agronomists or anyone that you came in contact with, other individuals who were influential in your career? Are there people across Canada that you'd like to talk about?
I think so. As far as Canadians go, one of the early guys that inspired me was Morley Hancock, who was the father of Mac Hancock. He was a professor at Guelph when I was there. Very interesting person, very dynamic, and a little bit of this rubbed off, I think. And then I was quite impressed with Mac Hancock about the time I was at Guelph, because he I think had already graduated from Harvard and was doing international work in landscape architecture. He was working out in the Middle East, and he was. You'd hear little bits about him and how he was manipulating people to get in there and do these jobs, and it was really interesting. And I met Mac since, of course, and he ran a very exemplary firm in Toronto with project planning. As a matter of fact, it became sort of the number one firm in Canada, in my opinion, in those days. And there, a lot of the landscape architects that we look up to in Canada had worked for him at one point or at one time or another. And I knew Don Pettit, and I was familiar with some of his work in Ottawa. I met Clive Justice out on the coast, and the Englishman, what the heck's his Tattersfield, yeah. And they're interesting people. I got involved with Justice at West Canada Centre. He was doing a little work for him at that time. We rubbed shoulders there. I was probably a critic of some of his designs and so on. Let's see, who else? Well, Bob Hilton and Miss Haringa, of course, both those two who I've mentioned before. But the rest, I think, were largely American. One of the people that influenced me most over there was a fellow by the name of Stan White, who was a professor at the University of Illinois, and he came up and taught at Michigan State at one summer session that I attended, and I'd met him on a number of occasions since. He was an old fellow, probably he was about 80, I guess, when I knew him. But man, what a innovator! What a marvelous teacher he was. And he influenced me quite strongly. I was also influenced by a fellow by the name of Jones out in Seattle. One year I was a visiting professor down at the University of Washington, and while I was there, I got to know Jones, and he has a firm there that's really one of the top firms in the U.S., I'm sure. And I became familiar with many of their projects and was very much impressed with them. I also met a guy who was from Oregon, a fellow by the name of Bacon, who was, when I met him, he was doing some work for the federal government in forestry. And he's a landscape architect, and the things that he was doing were, he was looking at the visual landscape, the view from the road, and he was developing a lot of principles, very practical visual principles that were of great value to the tourist industry, and the view from the road when industry was coming into conflict with tourism. For instance, clear cutting, the placement of hydro lines, and all these sorts of things. And he was, as I say, he was developing principles that would just minimize the impacts of these conflicts, and very practical and very worthwhile. While I was in Washington, I did a little work on the view from the road too, using a computer program to just evaluate and decide just how you would limit or create the views from the road. For instance, one of the projects we had dealt with the view from I-5, Interstate 5, over the town of Olympia, and the program was had good backup information, and all this could be done on the computer, which was rather interesting.
That was in 78 or so when you were
Yeah,
there
right.
at the same time?
Yeah, yeah. Let's see, what else? Oh, while I was down at Washington too, I did some environmental impact assessment in the Green River Valley. We did that for King County, Washington. And it was certainly a worthwhile project.
Was that an early approach to environmental impact assessment?
Not really, no. By that time, the U.S., I don't know what department, I can't recall what department it was, but the U.S. group that administered environmental impact assessment was pretty well established. Mm-hmm. And they had handbooks out and this sort of thing. Yeah. I guess that's about all I have on.
Okay, on the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can go on. You mentioned just when you were talking about Clive Justice, you mm-hmm. said a very interesting word in that in your statement, Wascana. Mm-hmm. Could you mention a little bit about the Wascana Center and your connection with it in mm-hmm. Regina?
I think I became involved in Wascana Center about 1975 or somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And I sort of got in through the front door, I think, because one of my former students was heading Wascana Center, was the executive director at Wascana Center at the time, a fellow by the name of Joe Moran, who the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects has recognized, and I think they've made him an honorary member, if I'm not mistaken. Joe Moran was, he grew up with the Wascana Center project. When he graduated from the University of Alberta, he picked up a job with the government of the province of Saskatchewan, and was assigned the job of sort of looking after the grounds at the legislature there. And then shortly after this, the Wascana Center idea was born. They hired a very renowned landscape architect from the U.S. to do the landscape planning. His name was Thomas Church. And Thomas Church worked along with a very famous architect who laid out the University of Regina campus, a fellow by the name of Yamasaki. And I guess Wascana Center was probably less than 10 years old, I think, when I was asked to join this committee. And I met some very interesting people on the committee. For instance, Henry Elder from University of British Columbia, the architecture program there. Did you know Henry?
No.
Fascinating old guy. And I can't recall. The others. There are 4 or 5 of them on the committee. Now, since that time, however, these people have been replaced, and I'm working with a new group. I started off with Ray Affleck, Roger Dutoy, Gus DeRosa, Peter Hemingway, and Richard Enrique. These were all architects, well-known architects across Canada, and really a delightful bunch to work with. They did a great. I'm sure they did a great job, and but the attitude taken, it was just good fun. We all enjoyed it. And Ray Affleck has passed on. He was one of the real great architects on the project. I think he had quite a lot to do with Place Bonaventure in Montreal, and many other projects of renown in that particular area. Roger Dutoy he heads the committee. Roger is an architect planner and a good fellow and does a good job. Gus DeRosa is a professor at the University of Manitoba. Oh, did you have him?
Yes.
And Peter Hemingway, unfortunately, his health's gone to pieces, and he hasn't been to one of our meetings for a long, long time. And Richard Enrique is a practicing architect in Vancouver, I believe. I've also, in connection with the Wascana project, I've been very fortunate to work with a young landscape architect by the name of Ken Dockham, who is director of construction or something down there. I forget what his title is totally, but an outstanding young fellow and doing a real good job for Wascana Center.
What exactly does your work involve on that committee? What are you doing? Are you monitoring developments on a...
I monitor developments. I give opinions on site development. But along with the architects, we all, as a committee, well, individually and collectively, we monitor developments. Each one of us is called upon to make some comments on anything new, and any of the landscape aspects just comes to me directly. I don't think the others are asked to comment on that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that it was Thomas Church who was very influential in the original design. Was that based on the work of, I understood that Thomas Mossam in the early part of this century was very instrumental in that, at least in Regina. Was Wascana Center something Thomas Mossam worked on initially and then Thomas Church? Or
no,
what's the history there?
Wascana Center was not created until long after Mawson. Mawson came to Regina and certainly did a lot with respect to the legislature and the few provincial buildings that were developed at that time. And he had a grand plan. He didn't just look after, or didn't address the legislature, but I think he addressed the city of Regina too, and came up with sort of the grand type of plan of the day. Yeah, and it was not until I would think the 60s that Wascana Center was conceived.
And interesting that the conception of that would be from a landscape architect, that at that point in time that they chose Thomas Church over some of the architects, for instance, in Canada.
Yes. It
was a very far-sighted decision, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. The Wascana Center Authority comprises representatives from the city of Regina, the province of Saskatchewan, and the university. These are the authority members are derived from these three groups. and each group contributes so much money to the support of the program. When the concept was first put together, they decided they were going to have one of the top architects in North America and one of the top landscape architects in North America. Yamasaki was well known. He had just completed Wayne State in Detroit. I don't know whether he was on. There's a complex in New York City too that I think he was working on at that time. So it was a well-known name, and Church was a well-known name, and they just grabbed those two. Yamasaki was the sort of person who believed that there should be a leader to the project, and he said, I will come and work on this project provided I am the leader. Now, I don't know how this went over with Church, but I think they were quite compatible. And I know nothing more about it, but certainly Church enjoyed the project. He enjoyed the people he's working with. He and Moran got along very, very well.
Well, those are big shoes for you to be in when you're looking at the drawings now to try to do something in what you would figure would be the spirit of Thomas Church, and sort of what his philosophical base was to landscape architecture, to maintain that with your decisions nowadays.
The Church's involvement with Wascana was largely the overall project. I don't think there is anything there that where you would see, Church had a very strong visual design sense. These are really different. You've no doubt seen some of his books, and I think I don't think he got involved too much in details, small details. Although there may have been some of this in the University of Regina complex, but it would have been very awe-inspiring for me if I'd had to try to develop schemes, the detailed schemes that Thomas Church would be capable of doing. It would have been really frightening.
A challenge.
Yeah.
Risen to the challenge.
Yeah.
Well, along that line, what do you feel are your personal contributions to the profession of landscape architecture in Canada?
Well, it's been a Western Canadian, or prairie, perhaps I should say, Western provinces orientation. I may have contributed something there. In sort of addressing some of the landscape architectural problems that are really problems that have derived from our particular climate and environment. I think certainly my breadth of teaching improved or changed over the years since I started off strictly with sort of a horticultural bent, and ended up by a stronger landscape architectural emphasis.
And to say nothing of the students that you influenced all the way along.
Yeah, I may have made some contribution to campus landscapes. I have enjoyed doing a little bit of residential landscape. Was I telling you about losing these pictures?
Yes. That's a very sad story.
Yeah,
I don't want to hear it again. No. My heart will break. That's part of the teaching that you do currently, then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I'll be doing any more teaching now. I've lost all my stuff. But that doesn't bother me at all. I've had some involvement in large-scale planning. For instance, Wascana, some parks projects. I did some work on the Paddle River Park. I don't know whether this was the park that's getting into the news just recently. Somebody's, I think our Liberal leader is raising some cane about a dam that was built along the Paddle River. I know there was a dam as part of this project, and my involvement was the area above the dam and planning the recreation facility up there.
I don't even know where the Paddle River is.
Oh, don't you?
Where is the Paddle River?
It's north of Edmonton. Have you heard of a town by the name of Mayerthorpe?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's up there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah. And the Paddle River was a river that flooded every year and caused great havoc downstream from this particular area. So they were putting in a dam and developing. There would be quite an impoundment behind it, and the opportunity to develop a real good recreation facility.
Okay.
I had some early influence on the campus planning at the University of Calgary, and some involvement with the campus planning at Red Deer College.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the extent of my contribution.
That's a major contribution. And I think too, and you didn't say it in so many words, but your years of teaching have certainly influenced a lot of other people in the profession, and that's a very significant contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Just the fact that, just as you've mentioned, some of the people who you learned from, and their energy and their enthusiasm and their love of what they did, how that influenced you. I'm certain that those things of you have influenced all of your students as well. So that's a tremendous contribution to the profession.
Well, it's certainly nice to see some of them going into the field, and you hope that you had some influence on them.
That's right.
Because there's been an awful lot of very nice people have gone through, and I've enjoyed teaching them.
Yeah. What do you think that landscape architecture, that's kind of what you've given to the profession. What do you think the profession of landscape architecture has given to Canada? What's the role of landscape architecture in this country?
Well, I suppose probably the best way of addressing this might be to look at some of the major projects that have, outstanding projects that have come about. For instance, National Capital Commission, this development in the Gatineau and so on is really something that is it's a landscape project that stands out as something Canadian landscape architects have contributed to, which Canadian landscape architects have contributed a great deal, and they should be very proud of it. I think the parkway at Niagara Falls is also an outstanding thing. The Ontario Place. Let's see. Museum of Man. I haven't seen it, but I've seen pictures and so on, and I know some of the landscape architects that were involved in it, along with the architect Cardinal. Mm-hmm. I think the Edmonton River Valley Park system falls into this category. Certainly Wascana falls into it. Quebec, there are a number of things in Quebec City, or a couple of things in Quebec City that I think are certainly monumental and a credit to Canadian landscape architects. One is the old town, and I think the ramparts up around near the big hotel there. And I love that spot there, that sort of promenade. Yeah.
There's a special feeling about being a Canadian in that location, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful.
Unfortunately, I know there are a great many things out in Vancouver and Victoria, but I haven't been out there recently and can't put my fingers on them. Although I do know some very interesting things that Justice Webb did for one of the distillery companies. Do you know that? There's some really nice little gardens that were developed by I think Webb was the designer rather than the Justice, but a delightful little Chinese garden. You view it through one of these moon gates. Super. I haven't seen Robson Square. I don't know anything about it, but it seemed to be a sort of a major project, but I don't know how it came out. Somebody told me the other day that they weren't too impressed that this wasn't another landscape architect. So
landscape architects view the world differently.
Yeah. Yes. No, I think we have quite a number of significant internationally or projects of worthy of international acclaim here in Canada that were done by landscape architects. And these are just a few of them. Yeah.
I think we have maybe about 2 more minutes on the tape here. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think the future holds for landscape architects? What do you think?
Well, one of our big problems, big obstacles, is visibility. We've got to do something about that. I guess we've got to blow our own horn a little louder. Perhaps we've got to get some of our leaders talking a little louder, perhaps. Perhaps our schools have got to do a little proselytizing, or just, I think it all boils down to the fact that we need more visibility. I think we've got to let the public know what we're all about, what we are, what we're capable of doing, this sort of thing. And certainly I would hope that we'd get at least half a dozen firms, or perhaps one firm in every province that would be capable of handling major projects which involve professionals like architects, be leaders in projects that involve architects, engineers, planners, and so on. In order to get visibility, I think we have to have some people in there that are going to be the leader of the head man in the project. This working for architects and engineers and so on is something that we can't go on forever if we're going to really survive.
And I think part of that too, you mentioned education. And if people come into landscape architecture with some other undergraduate education, then get a graduate degree, maybe there's room there for landscape architects to get into policy making and to get into the decision-making part of all of this too. And also, if they had that graduate degree, perhaps they then would get the recognition that they so deserve and be able to be the leaders, the team leaders, rather than one of the group, actually the leader of the group. Yeah. So do you see a good future for landscape architects?
There's a future. There's a good future